When the wolf looked at me, my heart stopped because I knew he recognized me. I don't know how to explain that without sounding like a fool. I'm a man of 60, born and raised at the edge of these pines, where winter eats the road and summer tastes like resin and smoke. I've worked with my hands my whole life. My words are plain, but that gaze, yellow and steady through the trees, hit me like a hand on the chest. It was not a glance of hunger or fear. It was a look that reached past the years and touched something I thought was buried for good. I was cutting across the old logging track before dusk, the sky the color of wet iron. The snow had a crust on top that broke under my boots with little clicks, and my breath came in slow white ropes. That's when I saw him, standing between two black trunks, the way a shadow stands and decides to be real. His back was level, his head turned a little, ears up, and the world around him went quiet like somebody closed a door. Shh. I told myself to keep breathing. My heart didn't listen. I have seen wolves before. Out here, you don't go 60 years without catching a shape at the tree line or a print like a clean star in mud. But this was not a passing shape. This was a meeting. I felt it in my legs, in my throat. I felt something like a bell ring behind my ribs. He took one soft step forward, and the brush did not even whisper. I should tell you this. Long ago, when my hair had more black than gray, I found a pup in the ditch after a late thaw. The mother was gone. Maybe a trap, maybe hunger. I never knew. The pup was the size of my two hands put together. He shivered so hard his teeth clicked, and his eyes were too big for his head. I wrapped him in my coat and carried him home. For a few months he slept by the stove and ate goat milk and scraps and lay his head in my palm like he was listening to the beat in my skin. I kept him alive. That is the truth. And then, because a wild thing belongs to the wild, I took him up the ridge and I let him go. He trotted into the brush without looking back, and I told myself that was the right ending. That was years and years ago. So now, this wolf stood watching me in that cold light, and some small, stubborn part of me whispered his name. I hadn't spoken it in years. My mouth formed it without sound. My eyes stung. I felt foolish for that, and then I felt something else, like pride and fear got tangled together. He took another step, not fast, not crouched. Everything about him said he knew who he was, and he knew I knew. His coat wasn't the sooty black of the pup I raised. It had silver along the back and creamy guard hairs under the throat. His left ear had a notch, like a bite taken out long ago and healed with a hard edge. His paws were clean and quiet. He was a proper wolf, lean and alive, and not mine. But in his eyes there was a steadiness that did not belong to strangers. I told myself not to move. Don't reach. Don't show teeth. Don't run. The rules you learn from stories and old men at the store came back to me all at once, like school lessons you thought you forgot. My palms went damp in the wool of my gloves. The wind lifted the tips of the pines and put a smell of cold iron and old leaves on my tongue. The wolf breathed out. I could see the drift of it. He did not bare his teeth. He did not flick his tail. He just looked. I remembered the way the pup used to tilt his head when I spoke to him, low and slow. I remembered how he would set his jaw against my palm, not to bite, but to feel, a little pressure of trust. That memory rose up so sharp I could taste the milk I used to warm for him. It made me ache. I told myself I was being stupid, that memory paints over everything with a pretty brush, that a wild animal is not a story with meaning. But the ache did not leave. He lifted his head just a little, and his ears turned toward me the way a dog listens for its name. I swear to you, that tiny tilt undid me. He was not posturing. He was not ready to spring. He was taking me in, measuring me, recognizing me. He watched me like I was his own. My knees felt weak, and I bent them an inch so I wouldn't sway. The snow popped under my heel, and the sound felt rude in that careful quiet. He didn't flinch. He held the line between us like a drawn string, not tight, not loose, exactly right. I felt the years between then and now hang in the air like the steam of our breaths, and I could almost see them drift and break in the wind. I wanted to say something. The woods make you small, but they also make you honest. I thought, say his name out loud. I thought, call him like you did when the sun came up, and he'd stumble from the rug, paws too big for his legs. But the words stuck like burrs. Fear is strange. It can live beside love in the same chest and make you shake from both. That's what was happening to me. I feared him like a man should fear a wild wolf, and I loved him like a fool who fed a hungry mouth and never forgot the weight of that gratitude. He took one more step, and the distance between us became a single breath. I could see the old scar near his nose, a white thread in the fur, and the glint of ice on his whiskers. His eyes were not human. I'm not saying that. They were his, bright and ancient and sure, but there was something in them that met me halfway, like a bridge made of what we had both survived: the winter, the hunger, the letting go. Somewhere behind me a crow called once, a harsh sound that snapped the air. The wolf's ears flicked toward it and back. He did not break the look. My heartbeat crawled into my throat and stayed there. I realized, standing there in the cold with my breath clouding and my hands open at my sides, that I was not in danger the way I had first imagined. I was in a kind of judgment, not the kind with punishment, the kind where a truth is weighed and then left standing. I am not proud to say my eyes blurred. I am not ashamed either. The tears came hot and fast, and the wind cooled them, and I let them be. I whispered, barely more than air, that old name again. I said I was sorry, though I didn't know for what. For leaving him, for remembering him, for growing old while he grew into the forest and forgot me, except he hadn't, not like I thought. He lifted his nose and took in my scent the way animals do, slow and certain. And something inside me went softer than it had any right to be at my age. I felt my shoulders drop. I felt my jaw unclench. I felt like a door I didn't know was locked had been opened from the other side. I already thought this was only my mind playing tricks, and that any second he would turn and vanish like smoke, that he would show me his back, and the trees would fold around him, and the story would end there. He did not run. He stood as if the ground itself had asked him to wait there, as if time owed us this pause. The wind moved in the high branches and left the space between us untouched. I heard the slow round drum of my heart and the soft hush of his breathing. He was still, but not like a stone, like a question that had taken shape and was listening for its answer. I have carried 1,000 small memories from the days of that pup, but what rose first were his eyes. Back then they were too big for his thin face, bright as wet amber, asking everything at once. Are you danger? Are you warmth? Can I rest here? I used to kneel so we were level and hold a cup of warm milk, and he would look up through steam like a child peering from under a blanket. I told myself, even before I set foot on this track today, that a wolf's eyes are just a wolf's eyes. But memory is stubborn. It climbed my throat and sat there, heavy and tender. He shifted his weight, not even a step, just a change in the set of his shoulders, and it broke whatever spell kept my feet nailed to the snow. I drew one breath and then another, and let my hands fall open again, fingers prickling in the cold. The wolf's gaze did not harden or brighten. It held. It had that same steady light I remember from the little shape by the stove, the look that measured me with patience instead of fear. I took a slow half-step, almost nothing, the way you edge up to a fence post to see a bird without spooking it. He did not flinch. His nostrils trembled, and I felt the strangest pull, like a rope tied soft around my middle and drawn, not to him exactly, but to the space between us. He was not behaving like the stories warn. No hackles, no warning rumble, no flash of teeth. He was calm and composed and, God help me, curious. And then he did a small thing that sank me like a stone in deep water. He tipped his head, just a little, to the same side the pup used to tip when I'd say his name in a low morning voice. It was that same shape of attention, the same settling of ears, the same plea, tell me it's you, tell me I'm safe. It was like watching a ghost step into the body of something living. My throat closed up. My chest hurt in the sweetest, rawest way. I could not help it. I whispered, boy, and the word broke like thin ice. He closed the distance by another pace, careful, unhurried. I could feel the heat of him the way you feel a stove's warmth through the air. The wolf lifted his nose, drew in my scent, and then, this made my knees go soft, he lowered his head to the side and held it there, not quite touching the snow, the exact posture that pup used to make when he asked for my palm under his jaw. He remembered, or I did, maybe both, but the shape of that offering was the same. He looked at me like I was his own. The world tilted a little. I don't mean I lost my balance, though maybe I did. I mean the rules I've relied on to keep a clean border between men and wild things slid across the table. I should have backed away. I should have raised my arms or made myself bigger or whatever it is they tell you in pamphlets. Instead, I found my hand lifting in the old slow arc of an old promise. I stopped short. He's a full-grown wolf, not a hearthside pup, and I let it hang there, a breath from his reach. He flicked his eyes from my fingers back to my face. I swear he weighed what to do. Then he inched forward and brought the underside of his jaw near my palm without closing the gap, like two magnets just before they touch. He took in my smell again with those careful sewing needle breaths, and I could feel the heat of his breath against the heel of my hand. Every nerve I have woke up and stood at attention. I could hear the tiny sound of his whiskers brushing the air. My body shouted danger. My chest answered with gratitude. Both truths lived in me at once and made a kind of trembling that was not fear alone. He pulled back and looked past my shoulder to the line of trees behind me, ears pricked. He was aware of everything, not just me. The crow again, the sigh of a limb dropping snow, the distant snap of ice settling on the creek. Then his eyes returned to mine, and he breathed out slow. I realized he had not come to claim anything. He had come to show me something. Maybe it was only recognition. Maybe it was a doorway he meant to lead me through. I felt the hook of that thought catch deep. Where would he lead me? Why me? Why now? A flake lifted from his coat and spun away. He took another careful step, and then turned, not all the way, just enough to angle his body toward the darker part of the forest, the tighter knit of spruce where the snow lies untouched. His head came back to me as if to say, well, I tell you the truth, my knees did not want to move, but my feet did. It felt like those days long ago when he'd toddle toward the yard and look back to see if I was coming, and I would pretend to be slow, and he'd pretend to be brave. I followed a quarter step, nothing more. He flowed ahead, then stopped to be sure I followed, and waited. His patience felt old as the river. We eased into a rhythm. He goes, I go, he waits, I catch up. The track dipped and curved, and the silence between our breaths felt like a thread we both held. My mind kept trying to put a fence around it, science on one side, miracle on the other, but the forest has no use for fences. At one point, a branch gave under snow and slapped the ground. I jumped. He didn't. He turned back at my clumsy startle and stilled until I settled. Every tiny check of me felt deliberate, as if he had taken responsibility for me the way I once took it for him. That thought embarrassed me and humbled me at the same time. I am not small out here. I've survived 6 decades on this edge, but I felt watched over, and it pried open something in me that I keep shut for safety. We came to a narrow fold between 2 banks. where the snow looked smooth as untouched flour. The wolf paused hard, nose working, and then he sidestepped left and looked back at me to mimic the move. I copied him. When I did, the crust under my old path caved a little, and I heard the thin crack of hidden ice. I stood very still. He had spared me a wet, dangerous fall, maybe worse. He made no show of it. He just waited until I steadied, then turned forward again. I want to sound sensible here. I want to say it was instinct or coincidence that any wolf would veer where the smell of thin ice rises like metal in the nose. But what clenched my heart was the way he checked that I'd learned the step, the way a teacher watches your feet once, then moves on. That was the place I almost said his name again, full voice. I bit it back and tasted salt and iron. We went on, and each time he lifted his head to listen, I listened too, like a student. Each time he stopped for a heartbeat, I stopped, and the world obeyed our pauses. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes can stretch when your pulse is counting them. All I know is the pull to follow grew, and the ache in my chest turned into a kind of bright thread of hope I didn't expect to feel at my age. I told myself this was a sign from the past, that I was allowed this one moment of recognition, and then the forest would shut again like a book and push me back into my plain old life, the stove and the boots and the quiet evenings. I thought the world would snap back to its usual shape any minute now, and he would be gone, and I would walk home shaking my head and telling myself not to be dramatic. I thought this was only a mark on the road behind me, not a door ahead. I thought it would all settle back into the ordinary, and I'd laugh at myself for thinking otherwise. I thought this was a sign from the past, and that after this, everything would return to normal. I tried to angle away, slow and careful, the way you drift from a dog you don't know. No sudden turns, no challenge. The wolf matched me without hurry, keeping that easy, measured space between us, as if we were two boats riding the same current. I told myself to breathe steady. The air felt thinner than it should have, the cold too bright in my nose. A thought rose up sharp as a thorn. What if he was only getting me to relax? What if this calm was the coil before a spring? The question came with a rush of heat in my chest that did not belong to the weather. Is he getting ready to attack? The sentence ran circles in my head. It didn't sound like my voice. It sounded like a voice from a book written to keep children alive. I glanced at his shoulders, at the line of his back, at the tail carried low and still. No bristle, no crouch. His steps were the same even count they'd been since we first moved together, each paw putting itself down like a careful decision. If he meant to take me, wouldn't the air say so? Wouldn't the woods shiver with it? But the woods felt watchful, not cruel, not kind either, just awake. I tried again to veer right toward a shallow hill where the spruces thinned. He drifted in that direction too, matching me, not pushing, not hurting, just there. The distance didn't change, 10, maybe 12 feet, the length of a trust I hadn't agreed to, but felt anyway. I swallowed and tasted iron. My hands had gone half numb even inside the gloves. I flexed my fingers and heard the leather creak. He flicked an ear at the sound and then returned his eyes to mine, steady as a held note. I told myself to turn back. Home was simple, a stove, a chair that knows the shape of my bones, soup that tastes of salt and potatoes, and not fear. The village was a short hour's walk if I kept my pace and didn't think about what padded beside me like a shadow with a heartbeat. I made a shape of that plan in my mind, a bright thread to hold. But when I angled again to make the turn, he came with me, holding that same invisible line, not letting me fall behind or get ahead. I felt shepherded. The word embarrassed me. I am not a lamb. I am a man who's buried more friends than he has fingers to count. But the feeling stayed. Is he preparing to attack? I asked the cold again, and the only answer was the soft chuff of his breath and the distant tick of ice settling on the creek. I watched his mouth for the curl of lip that would show teeth. Nothing. I watched for a shoulder lowering, for the weight to shift from inquiry to intent. Nothing. He moved like an escort who doesn't need to announce himself. It unnerved me more than if he'd growled. He guided me by inches to the left, to a part of the woods I don't take in winter because the drifts swallow the old path. The snow there lay smooth as a sheet, just pulled tight. He stepped to the side and paused. I paused too, because at this point my body was learning him the way your hands learn a tool. He sniffed the air, 1, 2, 3, and then cut across that smoothness at a low place where the wind had scoured the crust. I followed in his wake, my boots sinking just enough to let me feel the hidden give and catch of the ground. I realized if I'd gone straight, I'd have met a basin of knee-deep powder that would have taken the breath right out of me. He hadn't even looked back to check I'd learned the lesson. He just assumed I would. Some pride in me like that, some fear hated it. My mind tried to do its job and tally reasons. Maybe I smelled of old milk and iron stoves, and that meant something from a world before his scars. Maybe I walked with the rhythm of a memory he couldn't place. Maybe I was simply the nearest warm-blooded thing, and the woods had a story to finish around us. I kept failing to make sense that smoothed out the edges. Every time I thought I had an answer, he would do some small, ordinary thing that knocked the picture askew. Pause for me, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Turn his head a fraction when I slipped, straighten when I steadied, as if my balance tugged on his. I tried a different tactic. I stopped dead. The cold climbed into me in 3 breaths. He stopped too, exactly in rhythm, facing forward, then turned his head back like a man checking a companion. We stood like that for a count of 20 heartbeats, the woods holding its breath with us. If he wanted me gone, this would be the time. If he wanted me caught, this would be the coil. But he only stood, calm as a prayer, and waited until I moved again. He did not press. He did not yield. He accompanied. "Where are you taking me?" I asked inside my skull, and there was no answer except the question echoing back with teeth on it. Where? To what? To whom? The not knowing sat hot and bright in my gut. I have walked these woods 6 decades. I named the hollows and learned the grain of wind, but the way he threaded the trees made even the familiar look new, turned the known into mapless country. He opened a door each time he turned his shoulders, and I stepped through it like a stubborn man who can't admit he's curious. We dipped onto a narrow run between old stumps, where the snow curdled in weird shapes. The wolf slowed, and so did I. He lifted his head to listen, ears picking apart the air like fingers rubbing cloth. I listened too, and only then did I hear the faintest undertone, almost beyond hearing, like water talking itself through stone. The creek, not the loud bend by the birches, but the quiet dogleg where ice roofs the flow and the current writes a song under glass. He was angling us toward the safe ford, I realized, the shallow where the bottom stays gravel and the ice holds. I didn't know how he knew that I knew that. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just knew the creek the way it speaks to a wild thing. But he looked to see that I understood, and the look said, "Keep up." I felt a flare of anger then, absurd and human. I wanted to shout that I could walk my own woods, that I didn't need a guide. The anger floated and passed like sparks that don't catch. Under it was another truth. I wanted to follow. The wanting scared me more than his teeth ever could. Want makes you step where you said you wouldn't. It makes you betray your own plan. My plan, turn back, go home, let the world be ordinary, was thinning under the weight of what moved beside me, step for measured step. At the edge of the creek, he paused and nosed the surface, testing. He set one paw, then another, then crossed with that smooth, unbroken flow that only belongs to animals built from wire and grace. I took a breath and went after, feeling the ice answer my weight with a low moan, feeling the cold reach up and taste my ankles. He stopped on the far bank and watched me like I was his own. That thought lit through me like a beam. For a second, I forgot fear entirely and felt something like joy. Then the fear rushed back, stubborn as the tide. I turned my head toward the faint direction of the village, toward the slope that would carry me down to the rutted road and the old fence posts leaning like tired men. I could do it. I could leave now and carry this strange mercy home and keep it safe inside me, like a coal you don't dare blow on. I had already decided to turn back to the village, but I stepped farther. Dusk came on like a hand dimming a lamp, and the snow began to speak in the small ways it does. Little squeaks under my boots, dry sighs along the drift edges, the soft hush when a powder crust collapses. I lost the shape of the old path the way you lose a thought mid-sentence. One moment the trees stood in a pattern I knew by muscle and breath. The next, the trunks were only dark ribs in a gray body, and the ground rolled with white that hid every sign a man depends on. I stopped to listen for the road's far hum. Nothing. Only the creek's buried murmur and my heart counting too fast. The wolf halted ahead and turned his head, not his body, just the head, patient, precise, the way a good neighbor points with a chin. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a dare. It was a showing. He held that posture until I moved, and then he moved, keeping that measured space between us like a rule we'd agreed on without speaking. Fear sat cold in me. It had a shape, a tight one, like a knot at the top of my stomach. Every time the wolf's shoulders flowed, the knot tightened and then loosened, as if my body couldn't decide which truth to follow, the one that says a wild animal is a danger, or the one that says a wild animal once slept at your stove and listened to your heartbeat. I told myself to keep my steps light, to place my feet where his prints went dark against the crust. I told myself this was foolish and holy at the same time, and I didn't have words to separate those two things in my mouth. He led us through a stand of young spruce where the branches hang low and hoard shadows. Twice he paused to nose the air, and twice I mimicked the pause without meaning to, a man learning the grammar of another life. The second time, he angled us left around a lumpy swell of snow that looked harmless. When I glanced down, a fine white line fissured across it as the cold set its teeth deeper, hollow underneath. A trap that wears a pretty face. I stepped where he stepped and felt the firmness hold. The woods changed their sound, the way rooms change their smell when a door opens. The snow went from tight to whispering. My boots sank an inch deeper, and the cold rose, tasting my shins. The wolf stopped again and turned that steady head. The light had gone from silver to iron. There were no colors left but the wolf's pale guard hairs and the faint red of my knuckles where the glove wool had rubbed thin. He watched to see if I was keeping up, with him, with the failing day, with whatever lesson this was turning into. I tried to speak his old name. It stuck. The only thing that came out was a breath that looked like smoke and felt like a prayer. He tipped his head. God help me, that same small tilt from long ago, and took another step. I followed, and the snow gave a different sound beneath my heel, an airy crackle that told me we were walking over what wind had carved and then glazed. My hands went to open again, palms empty, as if that would balance us both. He stopped so suddenly that I nearly took a fool's step past him. The wolf sat, just folded those long legs under and planted himself square across the narrow way between two blown drifts, a gate made of muscle and bone. He did not look back. He didn't growl. He didn't bear anything. He simply sat and filled the path with his certainty. Move, I tried to say, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. I took one cautious shuffle forward, meaning only to pass him with the respect I'd give any neighbor's big dog. He lifted his head a fraction and breathed out a soft huff. Not angry, not scared, just a sound that said, "No." It hit me harder than a shout would have. I stopped. My left boot hung in the air, then found the snow again, and I felt childish and old in the same second. I peered around him. The light had sunk low enough that depth was a lie. Everything ahead was gray, grayer, almost black. He held his post. I bent my knees and leaned, trying to read the land the way a blind man reads the raised letters on a book. The snow beyond the wolf looked the same as all the rest. Smooth, harmless, quiet. He did not move. Something in me bristled at being told no by a creature I should fear and wanted to trust. I eased my foot out to the side to skirt him, the way water works around a stone. He rose in one smooth, unhurried motion and stepped sideways with me, barring me again. Not a threat, a boundary. He set his weight and met my eyes, and in that look there was no violence, only a grave insistence. He was keeping me somewhere on purpose. Why? I asked the air, and the air did not answer. My heart thudded in my ribs like a bad drummer. I swallowed and tasted metal. The wolf held still long enough that my anger cooled down to embarrassment, and the embarrassment cooled into listening. I crouched, a slow old man crouch that made my knees crack, and leaned out just enough to peer into the dark ahead. The land fell away. It didn't droop or slope. It fell, a clean, sudden cut where the wind had eaten out the drift's belly and left a lip of snow hanging like a false promise. 3 steps. That's all it would have taken. 3 steps and I'd have punched through into a void. I don't know how far. Far enough to break a leg if the bottom was stumps and rock. Far enough to go under if the creek ran black at the base. Far enough to finish the story in a way I don't want. My mouth went dry. The back of my neck tingled the way it used to when my father's voice went quiet in a way that meant danger. I sat back on my heels and let out a sound that wasn't a word. The wolf looked at me then, finally, and the look held none of the pride I expected, none of the "I told you so" I might have given. It was simpler and heavier, you see. I nodded like a child nods when a teacher points at the chalkboard. I swallowed again. The fear that had coiled hot in me uncoiled and slid into something else, gratitude so sharp it hurt. He had not only kept me from a bad step, he had chosen to. He had made his body the hinge on a door I shouldn't open. My chest ached with it. He watched me like I was his own. I felt the words inside me like a lit match. Animals remember. He rose from the sit and slanted away from the drop, cutting a new line across the drift that hugged a ridge of shrubs barely poking through. I followed, humble now, each foot placed where his had touched. The snow held. The dark gave us a little more shape as our eyes caught up. When we'd cleared the worst of it, he glanced back once, a check-in, nothing more, and then moved on with that measured, unshowy grace that makes a man want to be quiet and better. We walked in a silence that wasn't empty. The woods had let us pass one of its teeth without a bite, and both of us knew it. I put my hand to my chest as if to hold something in place. The knot there loosed a little. The cold bit my cheeks harder as the last light thinned. I thought I had seen the whole of the miracle the day had for me. I thought he would leave now that the worst danger was behind, that he'd done what he came to do and vanish into his own life, and I would be left with the story and the shaking. I thought he would abandon me here, but it was only beginning. Snow squeaked under our boots and paws, and the dark stitched itself tighter between the trees. We had skirted the hidden drop, and the wolf moved with that quiet confidence that made me feel both small and looked after. A smell of cold iron, old bark, and the faintest ghost of smoke rode the air. My fingers ached inside the gloves. I flexed them and felt the old itch in my palms where memory lives. I used to hold a chipped blue bowl in those same hands, the pup's whole head disappearing in the steam as he lapped, bumping the rim with his milk-wet nose. When he was too little to stand steady, I'd cup both palms and let him drink from me, the heat of his breath trapped in that small cave of fingers, his tongue quick, rasping, grateful. He'd look up mid-sip with eyes too big for his face, as if checking I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd whisper nonsense, the way people do to babies, and he'd lean the soft shelf of his jaw into my skin. That pressure, gentle, trusting, soldered something in me I didn't know could be fixed. The wolf ahead of me slowed. A thin wind threaded through the spruce and laid a hush across the snow, as if the forest itself leaned closer. He turned, not all the way, just enough that his eyes found mine, and waited until I stepped into that invisible circle between us. The years folded in on themselves like pages of a book blown shut. I took off my right glove without thinking. The cold bit the web between my fingers and set my knuckles burning, but I needed skin. I needed to know if this was the same world where warm milk and small bones had once asked my hands for mercy. He saw the motion and stilled further, no flinch, no retreat. The lamp of his gaze stayed steady, not hard, not soft, present. I lifted my hand, palm open, and held it in the air between us. My heart went into a strange gallop, like a horse spooked and choosing to stand its ground anyway. Fear sat on one side of my ribs. Love sat on the other. They both leaned in. He stepped once. The sound his paw made in the crust was a neat press, a faint pop, and then quiet. His breath plumed and drifted, and I felt the ghost of it on my wrist before he even touched me. He paused there, as if asking permission in the only language he owned. Then he did the smallest, most devastating thing. He lowered the weight of his muzzle, just the warm bridge of it, into the cradle of my palm. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't claiming. It was an offering as bare and bright as fire in winter. The coarse guard hairs tickled my lifeline. The softer fur beneath moved with each breath. Heat soaked into my skin. My fingers curled by instinct and then forced themselves open again, because he is wild, because I am not a fool, because a touch is not possession. I felt the fine tremor of his whiskers as he scented me, and the shape of the old scar near his nose that I hadn't seen this close until now. My throat closed. My eyes burned. In his eyes, Lord, in his eyes, there was no demand. There was history. There was the plain, unsentimental comprehension you sometimes see in the oldest people and the wildest animals. A measuring that includes mercy. There was such gratitude in his eyes that I couldn't hold back. The tears came hot, spilling faster than the cold could catch them, and I let them run because anything else would be a lie. I stammered, "Thank you," like a man babbling prayer after a storm spares his house. Thank you for living. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for keeping me from stepping into the dark. He breathed out, a soft huff that fogged my wrist and leaned that fraction more, not needful, not needy, just sure. I remembered the first time the pup had trusted me with his jaw, how I'd promised out loud, fool that I was, that I would not break what he handed me. Then I broke it anyway by doing the right thing. I took him back to the ridge and opened my hands and let the forest take its own back. I had told myself he did not look back. Maybe he hadn't, but standing here with his muzzle in my palm, I felt the weight of being forgiven for not being able to keep what I loved. I wanted to speak his old name, full voice, the way a bell speaks a church. I tasted it. I swallowed it. The woods don't love big noises. Instead, I said, "I'm here," and the words left my mouth as a white ribbon. He answered by shifting his jaw into my hand for the barest heartbeat, an old ritual made new, then lifted his head clear and blinked slow. The cold bit my wet cheeks and reminded me I'm made of skin and time. He took a step back, and a panic like a child's touched me. Don't go, not yet, ridiculous and real. He didn't leave. He angled his body, that quiet invitation again, as if to say the lesson isn't over. I slid the glove back on with clumsy fingers, and the wool grabbed at my salt-wet skin. I wiped my face with the back of my wrist and laughed once without sound. The laugh tasted like iron and joy. We moved again, and I walked inside a glow that had nothing to do with light. Every small sound was brighter. The faint rattle of a dry leaf stubborn under snow, the tiny tick when ice tightens as evening drops, the creak of an old trunk settling into cold. Shame and pride traded places in me with every step. I was ashamed I'd doubted him. I was proud I'd been the man who once kept a fragile life warm enough to go on. Both truths fit. The woods made room for both. I kept stealing looks at him the way a poor man counts a sudden gift to be sure it's real. He never looked away for long. He'd check me like a shepherd checks a lamb, like a father checks a child, like a friend checks a friend who thinks he's fine but isn't. Each glance struck me clean. Each glance said, "You are not alone. If your heart is stuttering right now, you understand. Subscribe. I tell the truth about the wild gifts the world still keeps for us, and I will keep telling it." We crested a small rise where the wind had combed the snow into low waves, and he paused at the top, looking out as if he could see farther than the dark allowed. He flicked an ear, listening to something I couldn't hear, then looked back at me with that steady, older-than-measure look. I thought the blessing was spent, that this touch was the last of whatever thread tied us, and that he would slip into the trees and leave me with a story and a pair of burning eyes. I thought he would go now, and the world would fold back into itself, and I would be a man alone again. I thought that would be the end, but no. If your heart just skipped a beat, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. He led me deeper, and the forest changed its voice. The open hush of the outer pines gave way to a thicker quiet, the kind that gathers behind closed doors. The snow lay in long, unbroken sheets until it didn't, until he showed me the seams. The first one was a narrow crack in the ice where the creek widened and slowed under a skin of white. To my eyes, it was flat ground with a dusting of powder. To him, it must have smelled like metal and running water. He paused, lifted his head, and set his paw down to the right, a deliberate step that barely marked the crust. I copied him. When my heel brushed the place he'd avoided, the surface made a dry, brittle sound like old glass. I flinched and felt cold seep into the back of my boot. He looked back. Just a glance. "Are you learning?" I nodded without words. We threaded the dark ribs of fallen trunks. A storm, maybe last year, had laid several giants down in a tangle, their root plates ripped up like the undersides of great hands. Snow had made soft waves over their bodies and then hardened so that a man could trust a step and break through to a hollow. The wolf took a slow path that kept to the firmer spines, never rushing, never showing off. Twice I reached to steady myself on a buried branch and found it slick with ice. Twice he stopped long enough that I didn't rush and fall. He was not keeping pace with me. He was setting it. Nothing about it felt like chance. Fear still lived with me. It didn't go. It stood at my shoulder like a companion I couldn't shake. But there was another presence now, something that felt like a hand pressed warm against the center of my chest. Faith? Maybe not that big. Trust, then, in the small, careful sense of the word. The trust a man lends to a rope before he commits his weight. I kept testing it. Each time the line held, some knotted place in me loosened, and then tightened again, because the loosening scared me. I am not used to leaning on anything but my own legs. We crossed a shallow saddle, where the wind had combed the snow into narrow corrugations. The wolf's back never changed shape. He moved like a sentence spoken without a stutter, and I took comfort in that rhythm. When a gust pushed hard through the spruces and sent needles hissing across the crust, he braced, then yielded then braced again, exactly as much as needed. I mirrored him without thinking, knees soft, weight low, eyes on his shoulders. It felt foolish, and it felt right. I kept arguing with myself. He's remembering you, I thought. No, he's remembering a kindness tied to a smell. No, he's simply using you as cover against other dangers. No, he doesn't need cover. He's danger enough without trying. The thoughts tossed back and forth like sticks in current. Under them ran a steady undernote. He knows the way. He knows a way for me. We came to a low swale where the snow was wrong. Too smooth, too innocent. He stopped and scanned, then veered left so gradually that I almost didn't register the turn. I followed, and the crust under my boot held with a dry creak instead of the hollow boom I feared. I thought of the years between us, the days I'd risen to stoke the fire and he'd risen somewhere to hunt in the dark. We had been two lines drawn out of the same point that now crossed again, here, in this trough of cold air and old wood. The thought made my scalp prickle. I felt watched over. Gratitude swelled so fast it tripped my doubt. I snapped at myself. Don't be a fool. A wolf is a wolf. Then the gratitude came back, stubborn as a spring under ice. At the edge of a blowdown, he halted and flicked an ear toward a sound I didn't yet hear. I held still. The sound came, an old limb giving way with a complaint like a door's last hinge. Snow sloughed off somewhere ahead with a muffled whomp. He waded out the little avalanche, then chose a line through the tangle that wove us between protruding spears and under a beam that would have knocked me flat if I'd stood tall. I laughed once, a short breath of awe. He didn't react. He didn't need my awe. He needed my feet to keep up. Sometimes he would glance back, and each time that look hit me in the softest part. He watched me like I was his own. I kept hearing that sentence in my head and hating it for how true it felt. My eyes stung again, for no good reason a man could explain without sounding weak or strange. I told my chest to quiet down. It listened for a few steps. Then the next kindness undid me again. A small meadow opened. Not a true meadow, just a widening where old stumps sat like gravestones under white caps. The sky above it had gone from iron to the dark blue that happens right before night decides to be full. The wolf stopped at the edge and tested the air. I tasted it too and found nothing but cold. He stepped out and then paused, head swiveling left, left, as if counting. He took a line that avoided a set of shadows I thought were harmless. When I drew level with one, the crust sagged and breathed under me, and I felt the soft give of rotten wood. A hidden cavity waited there where a stump had eaten out from the inside. If I'd tested it blind, I might have gone to my hip in a heartbeat, leg trapped in ice-laced fibers. He had counted for me. I muttered thank you into my scarf. He moved on as if that was the point. It dawned on me then with a clean, frightening clarity. This wasn't random alignment. This was intention. He wasn't accidentally in front of me any more than I had accidentally taken him into my hands all those winters ago. He knew the road I could walk and the places I could not. Maybe he knew it because the land taught him, maybe because some thin thread between us hummed when I strayed. I don't know. I only know the feeling. Not that of being led like a child, but of being accompanied by something older than my fear. I swayed between wanting to follow him into whatever night he chose and wanting to cut for home before the dark sealed the trees into a single wall. The village floated in my mind like a warm square of light. The wolf in front of me was a different kind of light, colder and more faithful. My heart couldn't hold both without spilling, so it spilled over and over, gratitude sloshing into doubt, doubt sloshing into faith, faith running into fear and soaking it until the fear got thin. We topped a shallow rise, and I could just make out, far off, the faint suggestion of a clearing, the place where the old track meets a logging spur. I felt a rush of relief. Maybe this was the end of the escort. Maybe he'd done what he meant to do and would melt into the blackness between trunks, a stitch pulled clean. My shoulders loosened. I decided that soon he would slip away into the thicket, and I would be left alone with my breath and my shaking, and the long story I would carry home. I decided he would disappear into the trees any minute now and leave me to finish the last stretch by myself. But I stepped forward, and he did not fade. He waited, and the forest held its breath. By the time we crested the next rise, the world had shrunk to wolf, snow, and breath. I had stopped pretending I knew where I was. The trees had shuffled their order like a deck I couldn't read. Every trunk looked like the cousin of the last. I turned in a slow circle and felt the vertigo that comes when you swear you're standing still, and the ground is the thing that's moving. I'm not a man who panics, but something in me went loose and hot at the same time, like a rope burning through my hands. I was lost. Not the kind of lost where you can talk yourself into confidence, the kind where you know the night will lay its whole weight on you if you don't find a line out. The wolf paused, watching me absorb the truth. He didn't come closer. He didn't leave. He simply waited until my breathing evened. Then he turned his body, that same small angle, and I felt the tug again, the invitation. I stepped in behind him, and we slid down the far side of the rise into a shallow trough where the snow lay tighter, packed by wind. He took a line that curved between two old stumps, shouldering white mantles. I followed and felt the ground change under my boots, from uncertain to certain, from question to answer. We threaded a stand of birch where the white trunks held the last of the blue light like they were candles. The wolf's shoulders moved with the same patient cadence I had come to trust, and the drum in my chest found that rhythm and settled beside it. He cut left to skirt a pocket of drift, where the surface wrinkled wrong, then right to avoid the low sweep of a bough iced hard enough to knock a man flat. Each tiny correction felt like a hand at the small of my back. No push, just the knowledge of where to place my weight. I don't know how far we traveled like that. Minutes can stretch thin or fold tight when a life is choosing. The forest softened around us, not kinder, but clearer. The hush changed temperature. The air took on a smell I knew before I named it. Ash, old smoke, a memory of iron where the plow sits in winter. We topped a small lip of snow, and there it was below us, the faintest shadow of a track worn into the white, soft as a pencil line. My track, the old path. I recognized the long bend around a tangle of alder, the way the trees leaned back from a place the wind liked to work, the low fence of a rotten log I had stepped over 1,000 mornings. My throat tightened, and then opened wide. Relief came so fast it felt like pain. I let out a sound that might have been a laugh, might have been a sob. The wolf stood still on the edge of the line and looked back at me. Nothing in him said triumph. Nothing in him said, "See what I did." He only watched to be sure I saw. I stepped onto the track and felt the difference move up through my bones. This was ground my boots knew, ground my legs remembered without telling me. The night hadn't beaten us to the door yet. In the distance, so faint I thought I made it up, I heard it, a sound like cloth tearing and mended all at once. Then I knew it plain, a dog barking from the far end of the village. One bark, then another, thrown soft by snow and distance. I didn't trust my ears until a second sound joined it, the clack of something metal from the direction of the pump, the kind of noise that travels strange on cold air. Tears ran hot, sudden, ridiculous, and I let them. I had been a breath away from the kind of dark that doesn't care about your name, and now the world sent me the small proof of belonging. I heard home. I didn't believe it, and I believed it with my whole chest. I took 2 steps forward on the track and turned back to him, the thanks pushing at my teeth. He had not moved. He stood at the exact place where the wild opens into the faint promise of a road. His posture was different now, not wary, not questioning, complete. as if some rule had put a marker there and he was honoring it. He glanced along the line toward the village and then back to the deep woods, measuring distances I couldn't see. He didn't follow. He didn't turn away. He held. He stopped exactly where I could walk on my own, as if he knew the road beyond this was mine. The sentence came out of me untouched by doubt, and saying it made my ribs ache with gratitude. I reached into my chest for something large enough to pay the debt and found nothing. I'm a poor man where gifts like this are concerned. All I had were my hands and my voice. I took off my glove again. My fingers stung and then went numb at the tips. I held my palm out, not closer than before, just the same, a promise that hadn't changed sizes. He stepped once and brushed the air above my skin with his breath. I wouldn't call it a touch. It was the absence of one, offered like a lesson. You and I both belong where we stand. He blinked slow, and in that blink, I felt something pass between us that didn't need words. Thank you. Go on. I swallowed hard and nodded, the way men nod at graves and at newborns, the way you nod when there is nothing left to do but accept the fact that the world can be kinder than you planned for. I wanted to say too much. I wanted to write his life across the snow with my mouth. All I managed was, "You did it," and the words felt foolish and true. He shifted his weight, ears turning toward the village bark, then flattening just a hair at some deeper sound in the timber. His world flowed in two directions at once, and he stood where they braided and set me down on my own side. My feet pointed home. It felt like betrayal to take the first step by myself. It felt like honor, too. I walked backward for 3 paces, because I am a child when it comes to goodbyes. He watched me with that grave steadiness that had held me up all through the failing light. The track bit under my heels with a friendly sound, the snow there packed by my own earlier passing. A little wind pulled at the fringe of my scarf and carried my breath away as a white ribbon. The dog barked again, nearer now, or maybe the air was cleaner of fear and carried it better. I thought then that the story knew its ending. He would pivot on those quiet paws, vanish into the black seams of the spruce, leave me with a blessing point marked by the line of this trail. I thought he would simply turn and go. He didn't turn away. Not yet. Instead, he came closer, closing the space between us until I could see the frost bright on the guard hairs around his muzzle and the small flecks of snow clinging to his lashes. My breath steamed and drifted. His did too. For one long heartbeat, our breaths braided in the cold like 2 thin threads, and I felt the world narrow to the small circle of air we shared. He stepped until he was almost near enough to touch. I didn't reach. Some part of me knew that touch would be a theft now, a taking when the right thing was to accept the gift already given. His eyes met mine, not from below as a pup's would, not from above as a threat would, but level, clear, steady. I have seen storms roll in and men make hard choices and children come into the world blue and then pink. I have never seen a look like that. It was not human. It did not pretend to be. But something in it recognized the shape of me I try to live by, the part that keeps promises even when they hurt. I don't know how long we stood like that. The dark pressed closer, but I hardly felt it. The far dog's bark broke and restarted like a tired engine, then softened until it was just proof that the village still existed beyond the trees. Snow made that tiny glassy sound when it tightens with falling temperature. I heard my heart slow. I heard his breath, low and even, like a saw in a careful hand. He blinked once, slow, and it felt like a hand laid gently on my shoulder. I blinked back because I am old and foolish and could not think what else to do. Then he lifted his head, just a little, parted his jaws, and let out a sound so soft I almost missed it. It wasn't the long, bright howl that turns your bones to wire on a clear night. It was low, small, a ribbon of voice that rose and fell like a sigh with a shape. It put a shiver under my skin, not from fear. Fear had burned itself clean earlier, but from the way the sound fit the space between us. I swear to you, it sounded like goodbye. Not a leaving in anger, not even a leaving in sorrow, a leaving that trusts the one being left to go on. I had the mad feeling that if I put out my hands, the sound would rest there, warm and fragile, and then rise because it wasn't mine to keep. My mouth filled with heat and salt. I nodded, once, twice. My throat hurt. The words that finally came were small and exact, shaped by a voice I hadn't used in years, the voice that belongs to mornings by a stove and to a head too big for its body fitting in my palm. "Thank you, son," I whispered. The name didn't make me the owner of anything. It only told the truth about a thread we had both felt. The word left my mouth and hung in the cold, and for a heartbeat I was ashamed of it. Sentimental, foolish, and then the shame broke and I was only grateful. He listened to the words the way he had listened to the ice, to the wind, to the creek humming under glass. He didn't lower his head this time. He didn't press his jaw into my hand. He held the line that said we were two lives and not one, and that this was right. He breathed out, and the plume touched my cheek like a blessing. Then he turned. The turn was so clean, so quiet, that if I had blinked too long, I would have missed the first step. He slipped into the seam between two spruce trunks, where the shadows make their own doors. The second step took him beyond the reach of my outstretched breath. The third erased the shine of his eyes, left me only with the dark shine of the snow where his paws had pressed. He did not look back, not out of coldness, out of wisdom. Looking back is for those who think they can bargain with time. He had already given me what we both could carry. I stood very still. The wind came thin down the track and found the wet on my cheeks and made little needles of it. I didn't move to wipe them. I wanted to keep everything as it was for as long as I could, as if the right kind of stillness might hold the world in that shape. A branch shifted under its winter load somewhere behind me. The dog's bark fell quiet altogether. My breath sounded too loud now that his had gone. The trees in front of me were only trees again. No doorway, no seam. I stared anyway. The print of his last step softened as the dry cold drew a film over it. I could have stepped forward and put my boot there, heel to toe, like a child pretending. I didn't. I let his leaving sit without chasing it, the way you let a final note hang after a hymn and die on its own, because clapping would be wrong. I put my glove back on by feel. The wool caught on the dry skin of my knuckles. The simple scrape of it was suddenly unbearable in its ordinariness, and then comforting for the same reason. I stood like that until the cold reached that particular pitch where you know standing is a choice you can no longer afford. Then I took one step along the familiar track toward the village. The snow there made a small, friendly complaint. I took another. My legs felt my age. My chest felt every year and a few I haven't lived yet. I turned once more and looked into the seam where he'd gone. Black. Still. It felt wrong to show my back, like turning away from a grave too soon. I did it anyway, because the living have roads to walk even when the dead or the wild have given them their marching orders. The track led me. The dog barked once, as if reporting my approach. Somewhere a metal hinge answered. The world set itself back on its rails with delicate clicks. I thought I could forget this moment. That time would sand it down to a story I tell clean and without shaking, that I would put it on a shelf in my mind with other bright things and take it down only on holidays. I thought I could sleep through a night and wake with ordinary breath and ordinary hands. I thought it would dim like everything else dims if you look away long enough. I thought that, but the truth was waiting just ahead. and it had a way of stopping a man in his tracks. I walked the last stretch like a man waking from a long dream he doesn't want to leave. The track carried me between the black seams of spruce, over the ditch where the wind always piles a little drift, past the old fence post that leans like a tired shoulder. The village was quiet, the way winter makes places quiet. Smoke climbing straight up from two chimneys, a dog giving one half-hearted bark and then remembering the cold. My door looked the same as it had in the gray morning when I'd pulled it shut with a mittened hand. The latch stuck, like always. The floorboard just inside complained, like always. The stove exhaled a low heat that had coasted down to embers. Ordinary met me at every step, like the world was making a case against what had just happened. I hung my coat, missed the peg, tried again. My hands were clumsy and too warm. I put a stick on the embers and watched the orange thread catch and climb. I wanted the room to be bright. Then I wanted it dark. I wanted noise. Then I wanted absolute stillness. I put the kettle on, not because I was thirsty, but because that is what a person does when he doesn't know what to do. The little click when metal met hot iron sounded too sharp, then too small, and finally right. When the first hiss of the kettle began, I sat at the table and laid my hands flat on the wood. I could still feel the shape of his muzzle in my palm, the warmth of it, the weight of trust measured in ounces, not pounds. My skin remembered. My bones remembered. My mind, God help me, started the old argument right away. It can't be. Years have passed. Wolves live hard and die young. Eyes look the same in a dozen animals. Memory turns strangers into family. You were cold and tired. You wanted it to be him. You made the world into what you could stand. I listened to that voice because I have to. A man who lives alone with trees in winter can't afford to let wish be the louder law. So I made my list like a sensible person. The coat was different from the pup I raised. More silver along the back. The ear had a notch I didn't remember. The size was heavier by half. Reason sat across from me at my own table and counted on its fingers and shook its head. No, old man. Number. But the other truth, I don't know what else to call it, sat just as solid. He had held his head the same way, that small tip to the side like listening for a name. He had pressed his jaw the same way when asking for my palm. He had matched my breath without meaning to. He had barred my way with a quiet sit, the way a friend takes your keys without a speech. He had led me to the very lip of the path I could finish alone and stopped there like he'd been shown a line on a map only he could see. He had watched me like I was his own. I poured the hot water into a mug and held it without drinking. The heat climbed my fingers and rested in the bones. The room smelled like pine and iron and the faint ghost of milk from a life I half believed I'd invented. I said his old name aloud. The sound felt like a bell rung under a blanket. Muted, private, true. My chest shook once. I didn't try to stop it. People like to tell you that animals forget. It's tidy that way. It keeps us safe from the debt memory creates. I've told myself that story for years. It lets you sleep. It lets you do the right thing when the right thing hurts. Tonight, I could not make that story fit. Something larger than me had crossed the space between a pup by a stove and a wolf in the snow and laid an unbroken thread from then to now. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was recognition the way trees recognize the wind they were grown under. It was gratitude without language. It was mercy with teeth. I set the mug down and it knocked once against the table. I startled like a fool. Then I laughed at myself, and the laugh broke into tears without asking permission. They came quick and plain. I put my hands over my face and let them. I said it out loud because the room had earned the truth with all the years it had held me. This could not have happened. But I saw it myself. I said it again, the words hitting different places each time. Astonishment first, then disbelief, then something like worship. This could not have happened. But I saw it myself. After a while, the crying ran out of road. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It had a weight, like a blanket the right size. I sat up and the chair creaked like a friend shifting his bones. The kettle clicked down from boil to hush. I noticed small things, because the big thing had filled me. The way frost drew ferns on the corner of the window, the way a coal in the stove breathed red at the center and black at the edges, the way my gloves lay with one inside out like a tongue. The ordinary was not an argument anymore. It was proof that the world can hold both things at once, a miracle that doesn't need a name and a room that knows you. I thought about the ridge where I let him go all those years ago, my hands empty and proud and broken. I thought about the vow I made then, that I would trust the wild to take care of what belongs to it. Tonight the wild brought him back long enough to tell me I had kept that vow, even when it felt like a betrayal. The praise in that is not mine to keep. It walks on 4 feet and disappears between trees when the work is done. I went to the door and opened it so I could see the sky. The cold put its teeth in my face, and I welcomed it. The stars had come out hard and sharp, each one a nail driven into a dark plank. The snow in the yard lay smooth. My boot tracks came in a clean line to the threshold. On the verge where the road meets the yard, I saw them. His last prints I hadn't noticed in my hurry to be inside. 4 neat ovals pressed into the crust, then gone, angled toward the seam of the trees. I stood with one hand on the door jamb and one hand on my chest and let the sight arrange something inside me I didn't have words for. It was not proof in any way that would satisfy a court. It was enough for me. I closed the door and the latch caught right away, easy this time, as if the house understood that we were finished with arguing. I banked the stove, turned down the lamp, and sat again in the dark, with only the red heart of the fire showing. The room breathed with me. My bones went heavy. My mind tried a few last skirmishes, coincidence, projection, want, but they sounded thin, like a dog barking at a far train that has already passed. My heart knew better. The animal remembered. The animal kept the debt and paid it clean. I said it once more, softly, to make it part of the boards and the stove and the window. This could not have happened, but I saw it myself. Saying it didn't change it. It didn't need changing. It settled the way a good load settles on a shelf and doesn't bow the wood. Silence came in and sat with me, not the silence of emptiness, the silence of a church after everyone has gone and the last candle still warms the air an inch above its wick. I let it fill my ears. I let it rest my hands. I let it make me small in a way that felt right. If your heart is full of reverence right now, right. Nature is wiser than us.